the best parasite tests. So I'll talk about the different tests that are available and the best tests that will help to identify what types of parasites you're dealing with, whether they are worms or protists, fungi, or bacteria. They are all parasites that live in us and cause us harm. If we haven't met, my name is Pam Bartha, and I'm the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. When I was just 28 years old, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I had always been a healthy young lady. I was a young mom raising kids, and I literally went from being healthy all my life to being suddenly diagnosed with an incurable disease, multiple sclerosis. And by the grace of God, I learned very early on that what I was dealing with was parasites in my body. And so that started this amazing journey. And now, 35 years later, I've been able to live MS free for 35 years. I've had the amazing privilege to coach hundreds and hundreds of people all over the world, helping them to recover from chronic disease, which is caused by parasites. Make sure to say hello as you guys are joining in here. The topic today, it's like a lot of people are asking me, like, Pam, how can I tell if I have parasites? How am I going to figure out what types of parasites that I have? So it's a really sad state of where we're living in this time that we don't have good tests, but I'm going to share with you what's available and help you to figure out what is the best approach for you. So, a very interesting quote from Dr. Herman Burno of the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene in London. He shared, and this is really profound, that parasites are the missing diagnosis in the origin of many chronic diseases or health conditions, health problems, including diseases and gastrointestinal and the endocrine system. So a lot of times as women, we think that it's hormones that is the problem, but it's actually parasites that is mimicking that we have a hormonal imbalance. And so we know that if you follow up my work, you'll know that all chronic disease, the main cause is parasites. And unfortunately, we live at a time where the vast majority of our healthcare professionals, they don't have good tests. They haven't been trained in identifying or recognizing parasites. And so they really are not able to help us. And they don't believe that we have parasites. If you've been taught in school for years and years that parasites are only an issue in underdeveloped countries, and then your patient comes up to you and says, well, I really think parasites are causing the disease I'm dealing with, you're going to believe that that's not the case. So how do we become exposed to parasites? Because a lot of us are living in developed countries and we're told that we cannot be exposed to parasites. So number one, contaminated water supply. And in developed countries, yes, it's true that our water is usually treated, it's usually chlorinated, but in my hometown, there were times when the chlorinator didn't work or they ran out of chlorine, and you don't know that. It's just like you have a couple of days where like 2 or 3 or everyone in your family is like, I just don't feel good. I feel gassy. I have a stomach ache. So it happens in developed countries, in developed cities where the water system, the water purification system could fail for a day or two, and then you're drinking raw water. So if we drank the water from our lakes and streams and rivers, etc., we actually can get parasites. So in underdeveloped countries, they don't have the sophisticated municipally treated water systems, but our water system can fail. So when you do go, let's say, hiking, never ever drink out of a stream or just raw water, even if it looks like it's coming from a beautiful spring. And even if you have well water, you just don't know what is upstream where the water has been. Maybe there was an animal that died way upstream. So it's really important that you treat your water for sure. The second way that we can be exposed to parasites is with our children. They're spending a great amount of time in daycare centers. And we know that schools are the same thing, because you'll notice, like nowadays, I notice that young families that they have their kids in daycare, the kids are sick all the time. It's like a breeding ground for parasites. They're passing parasites all the time. And unfortunately, with schools, like if our kids are dealing with some parasites, then and they're going to school, they can be transmitted, right? But in between students, etc. Just with improper hygiene, kids are not always the greatest at washing their hands when they're supposed to. So just that kids are exposed to more children in daycare and in school, for sure, is a really great source of passing parasites around. Right now, we have a lot of people that have pets living in their home, and I'm a huge pet fan. I love dogs, but I've really gone down this journey where I had a golden retriever. We had her in our home, and then we had a mountain dog, Swiss mountain dog, and had him in our home. And now, so those have both been with our kids. But now we have two Great Pyrenees dogs, and they are outside just because of what I've learned. If you do have pets in the home, please be aware that, number one, especially for people that live in cities and they have a small yard, and even when you clean up the stool from the feces from your dog, it smears onto the grass and onto the ground. And if there's kids playing, they're going to be exposed to parasites. And the dogs will step on it, and then they'll come walking back in your house. So that's another way. And then a lot of people have pets sleeping in their beds, and that's a really, like, I love dogs, but just wash your hands, use hygiene, count to 20. With our grandkids, we get them to do ABCs, like, so that they're washing their hands. I think you need at least 20 seconds with a good amount of soap to get any parasite eggs off your hands, and deworming your pets regularly. But dogs and animals, they eat disgusting things, right? And you can't stop them. So just be aware that they do carry parasites. If you do a lot of gardening, if you like walking barefoot, and I think walking barefoot is wonderful, it's a great way to ground yourself, but just be aware that some of these parasites can actually move through your skin, whether you're gardening, whether you're walking barefoot, whether you're in water. Sometimes in water, they will pass through you. So I'm not trying to make you paranoid about parasites, but I'm just trying to help you to see that even though you live in a developed country, you are exposed to parasites. They are all around us. You could have somebody that used a shopping cart before you, and maybe they didn't wash their hands and they have parasites. You can find, there's been studies where they find fecal matter on the handlebars of shopping carts. So parasites are all around us. We don't have to be like paranoid of them, but we have to acknowledge that it's not just a problem in underdeveloped countries. We have lots of parasites in developed countries, and we have not been told the truth. Also, many of us are traveling more. We might travel to different countries, and not just traveling where we're exposed to different parasites, but the food that's coming to our country, coming from all over the world, and they use different types of fertilizers. So just rinsing off fruit doesn't necessarily get rid of the parasites that could be present on the fruit. And also, a lot of people eat sushi now, right? And sushi is the raw fish is supposed to be frozen, and it's supposed to freeze to kill the parasites, but that's not always the case. So there are multiple ways that we are exposed to parasites. And the biggest factor that makes us susceptible to parasitic infestations, I believe, of course, our exposure, but the biggest thing is the overuse of antibiotics. And for many of us, included myself, when I was a young girl, just before the age of 10, we were on a lot of antibiotics. Every time we got a sore throat and a fever, my mom the doctors really worried her about strep and about how that can affect your heart. And so she would really ask the doctors to put us on antibiotics. And then as a teenager, I was on antibiotics for acne. So I was on tetracycline for months for acne, and that is brutal. What it does, the antibiotics, but also if you're on for longer periods of time with antibiotics and broad spectrum antibiotics, it devastates your ecosystem, the health promoting microbes that protect you from the parasitic infestation. So a lot of us, we lose our natural defense, that ecosystem, through the use of antibiotics, and then we're exposed to parasites around us, which is just part of life. And those are the parasites that are able to get a grip on us. And they multiply in our intestines. They move through our intestinal wall into our blood. They move to different organs. And then it's factors in our lifestyle that cause us to end up with either a greater burden of parasites, so high stress, not enough sleep, eating a lot of carbohydrates, because the processed carbs, especially because that is their favorite food. So these are all ways that we become infested with parasites. And today we're going to talk about, well, okay, when we do, how are we going to figure out the test? Before we do that, though, I just wanted to mention like some symptoms of parasites that you may not realize. Virtually almost every symptom that we can be faced with can be caused by parasites. So, for example, the debilitating fatigue that we can experience, insomnia, cognitive impairment. So, our mental clarity, our ability to focus, foggy head, etc., anxiety, depression, so our mood also. And then, of course, our digestive health. So we can have constipation, diarrhea, or alternating constipation or diarrhea, bloating, gas symptoms, any type of inflammatory bowel disease, muscle stiffness, pain, the spasms, those Charlie horses that we thought were only because of calcium. Very often they are caused by these parasites. And things like anemia, back pain, skin lesions, not being able to put on weight, or maybe we're obese and maybe we have these terrible food addictions that we just can't control ourselves. A lot of these parasites, they make us crave the processed carbs and the sugars like a drug addiction. So, and also weakened immune system, where maybe we do get a lot of viral, but then some of us don't get a lot of viral infections. Some of us we're just a weakened immune system. And then how do we get these parasites also? So it's the factors I mentioned, but we can also get them through biting insects, not just the ticks where you get Lyme disease, but also things like mosquitoes. So the mosquitoes will carry not just the Lyme infections, the Borrelia, Babesia, Bartonella, those ones, and some of them are protists, some of them are bacteria. Those are all parasites because they live in us and they cause us harm. But the mosquitoes can also carry the larvae of these filarial small roundworms. Filarial means they're really small and they're roundworms, an immature form of the roundworm. And so we can become infected through any biting insect. So it's not just mosquitoes and ticks, but horseflies, spiders, and spiders, etc. So any biting insect. Again, so contaminated food and water, and again, they can come in through our skin, our nose, and even we can pass these on with our partners. And so it's really important to not only treat yourself, but also treat your partner. So parasites are all over the world. They are not just an issue with underdeveloped countries. They are the cause of all disease, the biggest cause of all disease. And they are neglected by our standard of care. I believe that our doctors don't know because you only know what you've been trained. But at the very top of our healthcare system, I really believe that they do know that parasites are the biggest factor of chronic disease. But there is no financial incentive to treat parasites. There's only financial incentive to put us on these immunosuppressive, disease-modifying drugs for the rest of our life if our body will handle it. So let's talk about the different tests. Like, how do we figure out what parasites we have? Number one, the traditional stool test. So some of you may have had your doctor say, well, you think you have parasites? We'll do a stool test. What I'd like you to do, thank you so much for all your comments. Just go ahead and type your questions in the question box, and I'm going to spend a couple of minutes at the end answering your questions. Hello, Tracy and Sheila and Lola. Hi. And Natalia. Awesome. Okay. So the stool tests. The stool tests are not accurate. Okay, I have coached over 1,000 students in many different countries. If your doctor recommends a stool test and it doesn't cost any money for you, go ahead and have it done. It can't hurt. Things that might show up are smaller protists like Blastocystis hominis or bacteria, or like different types of pathogenic bacteria or small protists. So Blastocystis hominis, some entamoebas, etc. But the really larger parasites and the parasites that are causing your disease symptoms, the worst symptoms, they usually are not going to show up on the stool tests. The doctors recommend that if you are doing the labs recommend this too, that if you're doing a stool test, that you collect at least 3 or more different stool samples. So just to take one little stool sample and put it in the container, which has usually has a preservative in it, so that the different types of parasites don't break down. But that's not going to, that for sure would give you a false negative, like 99.99% of the time. So they say at least 3 different stool samples, like different days, different parts of the stool. And when I remember years ago when I did this with my GP, my doctor, he said, make sure you smush up the stool, because if it's more stiff, like constipated, they're not going to test it, because they're only looking for parasites in people that have diarrhea. All right. So that is totally wrong, because people that have constipation can have just as many parasites as somebody with diarrhea, but just be aware of that. So if you are doing a stool test, if it's covered, doesn't hurt, go ahead and do it, but just make sure you really smush up the stool so it looks watery, so it looks like possible diarrhea. And again, you are collecting stool over several different days. And if you don't have enough different samples, then you really run the risk of a negative test result. And then even if you have a negative test result, that's usually the case for most people, then the doctors may choose to do a different type of test. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the different types of other tests that are available. And they will look in the stool test, they will look for the eggs of some of the different types of worms, and they will also look for the presence of the worms themselves. But I have just seen this overlooked so many times. Like, even some of our students will send in a parasite, a worm sample, and they'll go, "Oh, that's not a parasite." And it's just shocking how inaccurate these stool tests are, unfortunately. So the next type of test that I wanted to talk about is the endoscopy or colonoscopy. So with endoscopy, that's really where they're sticking a tube, let's say, down your throat, and you have to be sedated. And they are looking for parasites of course, usually they're looking for more parasites that would cause diarrhea, where it is watery, loose stools, cramping, gas, but also other um, abdominal illnesses. And they can do 2 different types. So the endoscopy is going a tube through your mouth, down your throat, down through your stomach, so they can look into your stomach. They can look into your small intestine, and they're looking for abnormalities. So not always parasites, but looking for pockets of inflammation, possibly cysts, etc., and growths and things like that. And again, there's the upper endoscopy, where they are looking more like at your esophagus, like your esophagus that goes down to your stomach, and also your stomach and the first part of the small intestine. But there's also a small bowel endoscopy, where they go farther and they can look at the entire small intestine. You can actually go on YouTube. I did this a while ago, and you can go on YouTube and you can actually see, like for colonoscopy, I did a search of colonoscopy and worms, and you can actually see that they do find worms, but they're not always looking for them. I don't know why. So the small intestine is about 20 feet long, and the large intestine is about 5 feet. So then, with respect to the colonoscopy, that's, many of you know what that is. It's where you have to take this terrible drink and it really cleans you out. I think for both the endoscopy and colonoscopy, they want you to like fast and to clean out your intestines. And then they go in and they look for areas of problem. But usually, again, it's looking for things like growths and cysts and polyps and inflammation and things like that. But parasites are present. There's also blood tests that you can have done for parasites. So sometimes they're looking for the antibodies. So if there are antibodies present in your blood against a specific parasite, that indicates you may have that parasite or you've had it recently. And then also there are antigens, which are kind of like foreign molecules that shouldn't be in our body, but they would be in our body, in our blood, present when we have parasites. So they're looking for antigens or they're looking for antibodies. And sometimes they'll actually do a blood smear where they're taking a drop of blood and putting it on a slide and looking under the microscope and looking for like little small parasitic worms. If you haven't looked at our blog post, livediseasefree.com, I did publish our latest blog. Is called Blood Worms. You can see these little worms scooting around in somebody's blood. So they can look for these small roundworms, malaria and babesia, which are two protists. Malaria and babesia are protists which will infect our red blood cells. So there are smaller parasites present in the blood. But again, this is not standard. They're not looking at everybody's blood for babesia and for malaria and for worms in the blood, unfortunately. And then there are also x-rays and MRI scans and CT scans. And what's so fascinating is that parasites cause cysts, but also lesions in different organs. So the lesions that they are saying that are that are causing the multiple sclerosis. So we know in science that there are many different parasites that cause these lesions in not just like various organs, but also in the central nervous system. So that is really important. And there is doctors' data, which is that is a lab where you can. A lot of doctors use them. So it's a lab that integrative practitioners will use, and it what they will do is they will do PCR tests. So they'll do DNA tests, and they have this technology where they can actually, from the DNA, they can actually identify what type of parasites they are. And so they're doing the PCR testing, which is the DNA test. And again, like they're quite popular with different integrative doctors, but unfortunately, they're not going to really tell you what kind of parasites you're dealing with. That's the problem. And then there are many home tests that you can do that you've probably seen different ones popping up all over the place. And so that is something that is becoming more and more popular. So those are the different types of tests. And so again, it is like stool analysis or looking at your blood work to see if you have antibodies or antigens against certain parasites, or maybe a different DNA test. And so I'm going to talk about one that's a lot more effective. But before I do, I just wanted to share that these tests can cost $500 to $1,000 or more for various different tests. And for the vast majority of people, they're not showing the parasites that are causing their disease symptoms. They're not. And it's really unfortunate because people are spending a fortune on their health and they're not getting the test results, or they're not getting the answers that they want. So what we do in the Live Disease Free plan is we definitely, it's very helpful to be tested to see what kind of treatments are helpful. So instead of trying to figure out which parasites we have, what we do is we are working with practitioners to do energy testing to see which of the treatments are most helpful for us. So with energy testing, there's different types of energy testing. It's not an exact science, but it's super helpful. Number one, ART, which is autonomic response testing, and that's an advanced muscle testing. You can also go to a chiropractor that does applied kinesiology, and you can also go to different naturopathic physicians that use AMA, Vega machine, EAV. So those are all different types of energy testing that you can have done. And so again, what you're doing is you're taking one dose of commonly prescribed parasite treatments, and you're taking it to a healthcare professional that does some type of energy testing, like I mentioned, and they're quite reasonably priced, usually a couple $100, roughly, give or take. But if you're seeing this practitioner for the first time, they'll want to do an assessment on you. But all you're doing is you're going in and saying, I'm just wanting to be energy tested to see which treatments are testing the best for me. So with that, what it's doing is it's called biophysics, and it's really helping you to, it's helping the doctors to see or the practitioners to see which treatments will restore your balance, make you feel stronger. They test well for you, and others won't. So then they'll say, okay, this one, yes, this one, no, this one, yes. So that's not telling you exactly which parasites you have, but we know that if you test well for 3 different parasite treatments that treat roundworms, then you probably have roundworms. If you test well for 1 or 2 or 3 different parasite drugs that really treat tapeworms, then you probably have tapeworms. And so that's been really helpful and really cost effective for our students. So, you're more than welcome to reach out to us if you find a good parasite test, but we honestly, like, if it doesn't cost you any money, then go ahead and have that done. But if it's going to cost you money, then we just have not seen the value with DNA tests, with stool tests, with blood tests at this time. And it's not telling us which parasites. So it might show that you have Blastocystis hominis and you might be treated for that, but you're still sick because that's not the tapeworm that's present, or the filarial worms in your central nervous system, or etc. So I think I'm going to have to cut this short. There's a coyote. So I'm living by the forest, and there's a coyote right now trying to attract my dogs. And he is yelping and yelping. And I think I need to just make sure that my dogs are not going to get attacked by him. So I apologize for that. What I'll do is, why don't you type your question in the question box? And what I'll do is I will answer your questions, but I'm trying to focus, but I'm hearing this coyote, and usually it's a pack of them, and I hear them, and it's just, I just want to make sure my dogs are okay. So I know that sounds kind of strange. It's very unusual, but it's getting a little dark, and I guess the coyotes are a little aggressive. So I'm going to let you guys go. I'm sure they'll be fine, but type your questions in the question box. And over next week, I will let you know that my dogs are fine, but I better go check and make sure they're okay. All right, take care and bye-bye for now.